Awesome. I'll introduce myself in a bit. So to begin with, I wanted us to have a little exploration because we're looking at a question of connection and just digitalization instead of digital colonialism. And so before we even go into the concepts of colonialism and digital colonialism, I want us to take a very historical view. And whenever I have this kind of workshops, I like to invite our audience to participate in one way or the other. So I hope, is my screen clear? I would like a volunteer who can read. I don't know how to speak German, but I would like to invite someone to read what is on the screen, if possible, at least one or two paragraphs. Let me see if I can go to the top. Yeah. Yeah, if anyone can volunteer from the audience or from the staff to read what is on the screen for us, and then we can get started. So this is a whole song, but since we're not in a music concert, I will not ask you to sing it. So you're very lucky. But we'll talk a bit about this. And we started in the year 1858, and we're seeing a tribute to the Atlantic Telegraph. And I'm really glad that it's in German. There's an English translation, but it also situates us in understanding what was the world like in 1858 and how does it relate to digitalization today. So we will talk a little bit about it, but I just wanted us to see that we are very grounded into the space. So Nadine already introduced me. I'm Esther Mwema from Lusaka, Zambia, which is in Central Southern Africa. And my community and society is closely intertwined with the development of emerging technologies like AI. And I'll talk a bit more about that. But also in my practice, more than just working on digital inequalities and internet infrastructure, I also work in community through my organization, Digital Grassroots. And also I work as a tutor in the field of internet governance at Internet Society. So education is very central to the work that I do in addition to art. So making sure that all the concepts are very accessible. So we're going to be looking today at what does it digital colonialism really mean for us? And so I'll just share my screen for a little bit and then we'll look at it in detail. And I'm hoping that by the end of this session, we'll start to think about how are we shaping the world? Because already we saw this German song, which was sent during the 1850s, and that was a different world altogether. And we'll see what it means, like how is this very poetic song, what does it mean for us? And that's what we're talking about today, a matter of connection, just digitalization instead of digital colonialism. And this is an artwork that I did, and I think at the end of this, we'll also understand what it means. So I want us to go back into the world. So we started in 1858, and this is an image from the 1866. So this is a time when the Atlantic Telegraph was born. And if we think about the Atlantic Ocean, we have many stories. We have stories of slavery. We have stories of trading human beings. But in the year 1866, it was a time where we see a very symbolic union that was born, and that is the Atlantic Telegraph. And I don't know if anyone wants to put in the chat what they think the lion means, what they think the eagle means, or even what this man here in the middle is about. So I'll give it just 1 minute. You can also verbalize it if you like. Since we are a small group, I think it would be good to be more interactive. So what are we looking at? What is the symbol we're seeing on our screen? Oh, before I go there, I'll give it 30 seconds or a minute. Let's see if anyone in the chat has any comments, or anyone can unmute themselves or guess what are we looking at. And there's this man at the top also.
Maybe the eagle represents Northern America.
Correct, correct. What about the lion? Any takers? Oh, let me see the chat. Venice? Oh, possibly. Is it Venice? Okay, so we have had a little exploration. So we started with a reading of a very poetic song about the independence. Let's see. Yeah. So we started with a song about the Atlantic Telegraph and how it was man's great intellectual power and the blissful gift from God on high. And what they were really talking about was the Atlantic Telegraph. And correct, this is to Valencia. And we see that there is, for the first time, a communication cable from one continent to another continent. And we see that this is a symbol for them, the eighth wonder of the world. And we see at the corners how the ships were the ones that used to load the cables. And we also see that the connection is not only in Valencia, also Ireland. And that was where the first cable connected from the United States to Europe. So even when we look at the olden days, we see that art was very significant for it. And we also see the symbol of Father Neptune blessing the world powers of that time who are still fighting to be the world powers of today by saying, or I want someone to read it in English now, who can read this quote. I can see the confusion, like what am I reading? But this is what basically at that time the Atlantic Telegraph was the main communication technology at that time was Morse code, so the little dot dot type of communication. So that was the earliest communication technology between the different continents, and the United States and Europe wanted to say we have been blessed by Father Neptune. So the symbolic of Father Neptune is the god, the Greek god of the sea. So it's like we have conquered the sea finally. And so that means we're the blessed nations and we're going to diffuse religion, civilization, liberty, and law throughout the world. So if we think about 1866, the world looked very different from what it looks like today. So today the world is more interconnected, but at that time there wasn't a lot of information about what was in the world. So it was a question of what religion, civilization, liberty, and law were they really taking out into the world? So already we see technology as an instrument for bringing a very colonial and empire perspective into the rest of the world. And that also helped during the colonial days for these empires to communicate much more quickly and organize more quickly than everyone else. And so that was the type of world we were living in. So with this research that I read, it talks about the fourth industrial revolution, where in this quote we're seeing that they're saying to themselves, the world is for us to take, the world is for us to dominate. And in this research by Evaristo Beniera, it says that the fourth industrial revolution basically organized Africa and said Africa is empty, and so we can grab whatever we want for military, economic, and technological power. So what was happening at that time through the cables, the telegraph cables, which are now the ancestor of the undersea cable, which carries our internet today, was used in the same way because now we have the story of the digital divide. It's like now we're going to bring internet to you, and also the story of now we're going to bring AI to you. And so that is where the history comes from. But we also have to look at who funded this dream, who funded this imagination. So at that time, this British empire builder, Rhodes, was very much involved in making sure that the Britain could benefit from the minerals in Africa. And so their goal was to build a road from Cape Town to Cairo, and also to build railways to extract minerals and to build telegraph lines in Africa. So that's where we see ourselves right now. But before we even go into that, I want to show this image from the year 1944, because many times people talk about the internet coming starting in the 1960s with the TCP/IP, but ultimately it was laborers, like Black laborers in South Africa, pulling the cables. And it brings the question of what do we believe about how the internet came to be and what labor was being used. And even now with AI, we start to think, where are the data labelers coming from, firstly? But most importantly, we see that there's a strong interconnection with the African continent. And that is something that I want us to pause and think about before we go into a deeper technical discussion about this. So, just to begin, I just want to see if there's any questions or clarifications from the room before we have a nice interactive video that I want to share. Mhm.
May I would have a little question. What were the things that these telegraph cables were used for in the first place at that
Yeah.
time?
Yeah, that is a very good question. So many times people wonder, oh, how did colonialism happen? How could these people know what is happening to control a huge amount of land? So at that time, the normal people were not using the telegraph cables. It was more of the empire builders, the generals, the officers, and they will send messages from one place to another about the regions that they wanted to conquer, and also keeping control of the regions. So technology, even in its inception, was very much a colonial concept because it was about increasing their empire, making more money, and also controlling people. So that was the reality at that time, and a very good question. Let's see if there's any other question. Otherwise, I will try to share my screen now. Let's see. Okay, let me share my screen to share a short story that I created. So the reason why I'm sharing this video is just to allow us to all have a different concept, because every time people talk about colonialism, it's easy to think about the different concepts, but ultimately, I want us to think about it from a more grounded perspective. Let me see if I can put the video in the chat as well. So this is a short video from my project that I shared, but I'll play it
Listen,
now.
child,
Just
to the
a
song
minute.
passed down.
So this is from my project called Afrogrids, which looks at African internet infrastructure. But before I talk more about it, I'll just share the video. So this is the story that I made. And just one provocation that I want to ask to everyone in the room. What would happen or what would you see if you were transported inside an undersea cable? What do you think you're going to encounter? I'll give us a minute to think about it because this story is about a community that lives across the coastal lands. And then one day there's a portal that comes into the community, and people accidentally fall inside it, and everyone is worried, like, oh, we've lost our people. But then they come out with nice jewelry. But the price for falling inside the portal is that they start to become invisible and glowing like people. So the chief priestess then decides to go inside the portal and think, if I bring my culture inside this portal, inside this cable, will it change the technology from the inside? And I think that's the question we start to think about when it comes to just digitalization instead of digital colonialism. It's a question of, can we change the system inside the infrastructure? So that's a question for everyone now. You can put it in the chat or you can verbalize it. If you fell inside an undersea cable today, what would you see or what would you experience? It's very imaginative. So there's no wrong answer. We can get one or two uh insights. You can feel free to share.
I think I would see money floating through a cable.
Would you take the money for your
I don't know.
community? Like, or
Difficult question.
it's hypothetical. So it's a question. Of course,
Mhm.
a lot of money is passing through the system. And then it's like our communities need money right now, and all this money is going to big tech. So if we take the money, is that a bad thing? There's no right or wrong answer, but it's a good observation. Thank you, Nadine. Uh, one more person. I want to hear, if you went in an undersea cable, what would you see or what would you do? Let's see in the chat. A highway with data and light passing by really fast. That's true. And I don't think there's a shadow in there. So that's true. Thank you for sharing. So this story is really a provocation because when we think about digital colonialism, we easily point to other people, the big tech companies, or we point to the banks or to the financiers. But then it's a question of do we also embody those ideals, and how can we stop from replicating such ideals in our own way of thinking and in our own way of living as well. So it's it asks us the important question of, if we had the opportunity to change the world, if we had the opportunity to bring just digitalization, are we going to do things differently? Or how are we going to approach it? And I think this is the most important conversation we have to think about as educators, but also as people who are in civil society, because we are ultimately also shaping the future. And that's why I like to use artwork to interrogate these things, because then we center ourselves and not just giving away our power and saying, well, this is a colonial world, but then it's a question of we are also have the option of benefiting from the system. We also have the option of maybe trying to change the system from inside. And if we can change the system from inside, it is very likely that also we are going to be changed, because you cannot change something and not also be changed. And that's the story of the priestess going into the undersea cable. I'll give it a little pause here because there's a lot of information for us to digest and think about it just for 1 minute. So you can do a little exercise for yourself. You don't have to share it afterwards, but I just want us to do this exercise to think about, where are you now? In the story, we saw people who are on the land, who were just making things with their hands. And then we saw the ones who fell inside the undersea cable and came out with a lot of wealth. And we saw another person who tried to bring their culture inside the cable, and others who did not even go inside the cable and were also excluded, like from the society because of it. So start to think about it yourself. What is your proximity with these colonial structures? So that's the first thought. What is your proximity with these structures? And is there anything you can do differently? So we can take just 1 minute to think about it from this story, and then we'll go into a deep dive. I welcome you to think about it, to write it, and I'll give a little silence for 1 minute. Just a few more seconds. If anyone has got their reflection ready, they can share, or if not, you can put it in the chat, or we can just close that reflection. Just inviting if there's anyone who wants to talk about it. Okay, we're all happy. I hope we've thought about it. Just going 3, 2, 1. Yeah, we're happy. So I think it's very important to think of our positionality, whether we are in academia or we're in the industry, because we see like the people we who were innovators at that time. For example, Nikola Tesla talking about how the future of wireless in 1940 would help to bring to enlighten the masses and to connect the uncivilized countries. So I'll ask someone to read it also. That's good. I see a nice comment saying, can we change the direction of what is happening inside the cable? Thank you, Clemens, for sharing that. Yeah. Anyone who wants to read this quote from the 1940s? So we are seeing how from the 1800s now to the 1900s, how the question about technology is about enlightenment. It's also about bringing safety, comfort, and convenience and peace into the world. And if we continue checking the timeline, we'll see that this is being replicated as well. So thank you, Andrea, again for the great reading. Um, so it's showing that even in innovation circles, even in academic circles, there was this ambition to do good for the world and how technology can be used for good, which is something that is happening even right now with AI. Because what are the stories we're hearing about AI? AI is going to give us great comfort, AI is going to be convenient, AI is going to bring peace. It's also the rhetoric where we see AI for good already taken by big institutions like the UN. So it's a big, big question about what just this digitalization is, and is it just a matter of connection, or is it just a continuation of digital colonialism? And so right now we see digital colonialism in a very negative way. But in the actual sense, when colonialism was happening, it was very normal. It it was popular, and this is what progress should look like. Let's see. Yeah. So now I'm going to show you a map also from the 1800s. And we all know this is the map of Africa. Uh, And I just want us to look at it for a little bit. We can see at the top is a description called the Eastern and South African, Brazilian submarine, and the African Direct Telegraph Company system. So when we started at the beginning, we saw the Atlantic Telegraph connecting the United States to Europe through Ireland. And now we're seeing undersea cables that are surrounding the African continent. And if you look closely at the year of this map design, it's actually 1730. So that's even earlier than the transatlantic telegraph. And what we know is that the telegraph cable technology, the policy around it, is what laid the foundation for undersea cables, which carry 99% of our internet today. So I'll go to the next. So what else are we seeing on the screen here? We're seeing something that was launched in 2023, and this is a map of to Africa, basically a gift to Africa in quotes. This is a service that Meta in a consortium has created the longest undersea cable in the world, and it surrounds the entire African continent. And we'll say, oh, that is so innovative. But then it's a question of we just saw another map. We just saw this map, and it was a telegraph cable surrounding the continent from 1730. And now we're seeing another map from 2023. It's like, how many years later is that? Someone who can do the mathematics. 1730 to 2023. I don't know who is good at math, who can count the years. But it's a very long time, a couple hundred years. And we see that this has landing points. And if we look critically at the landing points for this cable, we actually see that this was also the ports of the Atlantic slave trade. So a lot of colonialism has created the way for the digital colonialism. This map is even much, much more clearer. You see the year 1730 here, and you see the landing points, all the landing points there. And this is Meta's on the right, that is Meta's undersea cable. And then on the left, this is the old map of Africa. And we can actually see very clearly from this map here that there are no border states. So this was even before the Scramble for Africa or the Berlin Conference. So you can imagine how long this imagination for to surround the African continent with cables survived even longer than before the countries became to be, because we start to see that, oh, actually there are no countries here. It's just a geographical map of the continent. So I'll give it a second that we can look at it before we see the next one. But I think it's a quite striking reality that we're living in today. I will go to the next one. And we see that Meta is not the only one. Even Google has built by itself, because Meta was in a consortium, but Google has no other partner. They built it by themselves. The undersea cable from the top of West Africa to the bottom of West Africa. And it's a 15,000-kilometer cable, and it was launched in 2024. We didn't know that it was coming, but most importantly is that this cable is named after the abolitionist Oladuwa Equiano. Oladuwa Equiano was an abolitionist, but before he was an abolitionist, he was stolen from his country and taken from there to there. So we actually see that the same path that the cable is named after is the name of the Google's undersea cable. And I talked to someone who knows the details about this, and they said that, well, they were naming their cable during the woke era. If we remember from the 2020s to I think about 2 years ago, there was an era of Black Lives Matter and an era of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So for them, it was like, yeah, let's name it after a Black abolitionist. And this is not the only project by Google named after an abolitionist. Even in the Americas, they have an undersea cable which they named after uh, an abolitionist as well from there. But we also see this map is not very clear. I think it just didn't load well. But we also see here, this is their map um of the undersea cable on the right. And on the left, we see the African Telegraph Company. And yeah, the image is a bit blurry, but there's a clearer version of it in my research paper. Uh, it's exactly the same, even with the same landing points that are there already. So what we see is that the laws of the seas that made this possible are still working in favor of them. And we also have to pay attention to a little detail, is that these undersea cables are outside the maritime waters of these countries. So that means that they do not identify as as an internet service provider, but they connect to a local internet service provider. And the internet service provider basically is the proxy for these cables. So that means that even if I am using Meta to transmit my data, I cannot know that I'm using Meta. I cannot know if I'm using Google. And so these data flows are already becoming very active. And that was the question of, when big tech companies come into these coastal regions, what are they taking from the communities? Can the communities own it? Or what are the implications? Much more than that, this is Google still. We see Google is building a fiber optic cable. So they're not just satisfied with undersea cables, they're building an undersea cable that goes from Kenya through the critical mineral belt of Africa and then they transport all the data to their data center in Australia. And this map is very telling of the story. So we have Meta surrounding the African continent, and we have Google on the western and in the eastern southern part, which is basically also majority of the continent. And I only used the examples of Meta and Google because they are the ones that have a very strong footprint on the continent. But actually, I can safely say that all the big tech companies are investing in infrastructure on the continent, from Amazon to Microsoft and even OpenAI are investing in infrastructure on the continent to extract data. And the data they are extracting is not just for social media, it's also data about the landscape, about the minerals. It's also information about the health and the biometric uh, health information in these regions, and it's all in the name of bringing enlightenment as well. But most critical is that where they are passing through are areas that are very important for developing emerging technologies. So all these regions are very rich in all the critical uh, rare earth minerals. And we see that in a lot of places that they're engaging is where they're bringing the infrastructure. So it's really a question of, are they bridging the digital divide, or are they just trying to access the minerals for themselves so that they can build a very futuristic future and maybe run away to the moon while the rest of us suffer the consequences of their large scale data infrastructures? Yeah, I will pause there before I go to the next part. Just, I know it's a lot of information, but I want us to digest and to hear feedback from one or two people. What are your thoughts? Is this your first time seeing this kind of project, or have you heard about it before? Or what are the thoughts that are coming up? So I'll give it 1 or 2 minutes to hear back from you. It is very shocking, and I am going to share. Yeah, it's quite shocking information. So I'll share that this is very new. These concepts are very new. And so the laws that made these telegraph cables possible during the colonial times are still the laws that are governing the seas right now. So mm, the reason why they're building on top of them, basically doing, they're layering them on the old infrastructure, is because then they are outside the water, the territorial waters of the countries. So they they are not recognized as an internet service provider, basically. So the local internet service provider, for example, I live in Zambia and we have Paretas, which is from Namibia. So Paretas may connect to Google's undersea cable, and I will maybe be a subscriber to Paretas here. And then I pay Paretas, and then they take my data outside the continent, outside the data centers, because Meta and Google actually do not have data centers on the continent. Amazon has got the data centers and Microsoft also. So if they have partnerships for keeping that data, there is no policy or law. So I'll give an example of the Data Protection Act in Zambia. So in Zambia, the Data Protection Act applies to every organization and individual in Zambia and registered in Zambia. So Meta and Google are not registered in Zambia. So they're not even recognized as anything in the country. So then data protection becomes a real issue. So even how much data they're taking, where it is going, where it is stored is not information that is accessible to us. So legally, what the big tech companies have done is that they are approaching this from a pan-African and a continental perspective, while individual countries are approaching this from this is my country, this is my law and my policy, which ends up taxing a lot the local innovation, while the big tech bring in much more affordable and faster internet, and which also kills local innovation at the same time. So your question is very valid, but because these projects were happening very much in secret, and they came online like 2 years ago, or so it's such a large scale project that there hasn't been enough studies about it, which was quite challenging for me to find information outside of what is publicly available. And also, a lot of it is hidden under proprietary rights. So that means that they say this is our private information. We cannot tell you what agreements we have with Togo, Nigeria, or Namibia, or South Africa. We don't know what they are offering at all or what they have with any of these countries. But what I know is that both Google and Meta, even Starlink, have signed agreements or MOUs with the Zambian government. And I'm giving an example of Zambia because that's where I'm from. And they've signed agreements with these companies, and these companies maybe will build an institution in the university, or they'll partner with the local mobile service provider. But beyond that, we don't know really. And things are happening really fast. And I would also say governments are trying to digitize and make sure that communities are served and have internet services so that they can join the digital economy. But at the same time, what is the trade-off, and what will be the trade-off also for democracy in the future? Because then these big tech have both the infrastructure, they also have the data, and they also have the soft power of the social media platforms and the search engines. And that's why I focus on Meta and Google specifically. So a very long answer, but I think it covers a lot of good information. I hope that's good. Thank you. I don't know if there's any other comments. Let me check. Oh, yes, are Google and Meta charging local ISPs for using their undersea cable infrastructure? The answer is a strong yes. And because because they're not identifying as ISPs, the countries cannot tax them because the country will tax the local ISP and not where they're actually taking the data to. So we see that even our regulatory framework is very limited, our tax framework is very limited, and because the internet is now a digital it's now common, there's no borders. It's very difficult even for governments to think in that large scale, uh as opposed to just doing a local law that applies to the local actors. So that is a good question.
Esther, could you maybe clarify what ISP means?
Internet service provider. So
Thank you.
thank you for that. Sometimes we just do the acronym. So any
Mhm.
internet service provider, local, uh, yeah. So they connect with the local internet service provider. And so if your internet service provider decides to join Google's undersea cable, you cannot really know. Or if they're using Starlink, you don't know. But Starlink is more open. And so we see something here. And I am just going to talk about it. So the United States government saw that the United States government saw that, well, private sector have their own data systems. How can we also get into the business? So in the Biden administration, they passed a a bill to say we need to study how to build our own transatlantic cable from America to Africa. So this one already passed for the bill and is probably going to go to the president since it's passed through the House of Commons. And this means that the United States also wants to build their own undersea cable. And the reason they're citing is that it's for national security. And mainly, we are already seeing how the United States is showing up in Nigeria and saying Christians are being persecuted and bringing their own military. It's also to show that they have a wider vision for the region and they want to build their own undersea cable in that part. And a good question is, how does the private infrastructure of Google relate to net neutrality? And this is the part where I say that these things are happening so quickly that even the question of is does this come against net neutrality laws? In my opinion, very much so. But it's also a question of when there's no legal restrictions or when there is no regulatory framework, they can get away with creating such a large private infrastructure, which is literally harvesting data from the region. And I think this is where a lot of academics should start looking into internet infrastructure, not only from the perspective of net neutrality, but also from the question of what is the climate impact of these undersea cables? How does it affect the seabed? How does it affect the ecosystem where they're built? That is something that is also not studied at all. So I think there is a lot of room to critically interrogate these things. But the truth is that they exist, they are functioning, and even the United States government wants to build their own transatlantic submarine cable, their own undersea cable connecting to Africa. And they are very strategic in their locations and they want to compete. They want to build this infrastructure to compete with Russia, to compete with China. So if you read the whole bill, you actually see that they actually mention that they want to have access to minerals, that they want to compete with China and Russia, and they want to use this as a national security measure. So in terms of democracy, there is a clear line and there's a clear risk that is not being addressed as well. I will not talk too much about Starlink, but Starlink is also it's the satellite under masks. Uh, one in 6 in 10 satellites belong to Starlink, and there's a lot of implications about that. And just this year, Starlink tested a direct cell to link type of communication, where if you have a mobile phone, you can connect directly to a Starlink satellite, and they were successful. And they did this test in Zambia, and so with the local internet service provider, MTN, which is the largest internet service provider in Zambia. So we see that they're already really active and big tech is really getting all the data and trying to extract as much as possible. Uh, so just to summarize with that, we see Meta having the longest undersea cable surrounding Africa. And because they were so successful, now they are planning to build an undersea cable that will transverse all the 5 continents. So they are going to build the longest undersea cable that is literally surrounding the globe. Uh, and we see Elon Musk has got 6 in 10 satellites in the world belong to Starlink. And with OpenAI, they're trying to build a 500 billion data center, and they're also entering Africa through a collaboration with Bill Gates to collect the biohealth data through Horizon 1000 project, $1 billion project where they go to African health clinics and they use that data, they use AI to aggregate the data and collect it. And also the policies for the United States in Ukraine and in the DRC saying, give us your minerals and we're going to give you peace. So peace for minerals. And we see how there's a very strategic pull to get minerals to build these infrastructures. And just this year, in Zambia, there was a an America First aid that was given offered to Zambia for $1 billion. So the United States said, we'll give you $1 billion, but you have to give us access to your copper. You have to give us access to your health data for 10 years. And you also have to give us access to the viruses that are in your country so that they can harvest this for their AI, and this AI, whatever they learn from it, they will not share it back because they gave the 1 billion. So Zambia said no. Zimbabwe also said no to the America First deal. But 13 other African countries have already signed the deal, and we don't know what they're giving away. So it's a lot of information, but at the end of the day, it's like 99% of undersea cables are owned by the private sector, and also 99% of uh, our internet goes through undersea cables, but only 1% is owned or partially owned by government entities. And I don't know how many are owned by the public, if any, but that should be under the government as well. So how do we decolonize the internet? So my artistic project, Afrogrids, from the video you just watched, tries to get communities to talk about this to raise awareness on how our internet infrastructure works. Because many times we think, well, I'm not in technology, so it doesn't really matter to me. But actually, it matters regardless of where you are, because the implications are going to be really big, especially with the coming of artificial intelligence. And so in my project, I collect information from different artists to try and learn from different artists and different communities to try and see what are the solutions for this big problem. And one of the questions that came up at the center was, do we want Google here in the center of Africa? And we see all these solutions like open and interoperable standards and protocols, um, tech co-ops that reinvest in our own infrastructure. We also say community and publicly owned infrastructure. Um, we also look at how we have to have whether we should have a restriction of data frequency, or looking at public infrastructures that are owned cooperatively. And yeah, and the question I see is, maybe it's not a technical question. Do the companies which own the cables automatically have access to the data being sent through? So I'll give the most realistic answer. A lot of data is being harvested from the big tech platforms. Google as the largest search engine. Meta is pretty large on the continent from the use of WhatsApp and Facebook. Facebook is huge in my country. So based on the terms and conditions, I think the clear answer is yes. And also they do not have the data centers in the continent. So this data is harvested out of the continent, and how they use it and whether they use it ethically or not is out of our jurisdiction. So the short answer is yes, but that is the short one. we can have a discussion about that as well. Because we have some 15 minutes to discuss and just think about it from the perspective of what does is this just a matter of connection? What does just digitalization look like in the reality of all these things? Do we want Google here? And these are some of the recommendations for reading. Some of them, this is by me, The Cosmology of Internet Infrastructure, which I published last year, which looks at both the artwork and also the different historical versions of this. And this is a paper that I published with Dr. Abeba Berhan on undersea cables in Africa, New Frontiers of Digital Colonialism. And if someone is interested in the climate justice movement, there is copper colonialism and how it's wrecking Zambia's farmlands and waterways. So looking at the close connection to the climate. There is also Intent by the Internet and the Fourth Industrial Revolution and Recolonization of Africa. And obviously, there are a lot of good resources, but I always try to get resources that talk about the region directly. So that is why, but there are a lot more. So these are the ones that I'll share, but you can also go to my website, which is on the slides, and I can share it later, where you can find all these resources. Otherwise, thank you so much for your active listening, and we have time for the Q&A. So Nadine, pass it to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Esther, for that insight. Someone also wrote it in the chat. It is our first time hearing about this. Maybe that is true for some of us. Yeah, thank you very much for
Yeah.
this visible approach also. And yeah, your idea was to collect also ideas about how to decolonize the internet
Mm-hmm.
within the group. And we'll do it as a question answer. So if you have questions or if you have answers,
Yeah.
we're happy, like if you bring them in and we can get more about this, talk more about this. Okay, what to do about that?
Mm-hmm.
So, and as we are a small group, it's your
Oh, there's a
chance
hand
to.
there.
There is a hand. Whose hand is it?
Lemons, I can stop sharing. Oh, that is a good question you bring to me because should we not use AI? I'll let you make the decision on whether you use AI or not. But you bring an important part of the conversation that maybe I don't usually talk about. So when we see the story of data labelers, we hear a lot about the stories from Kenya and also how data labelers in that region have suffered a lot of mental anguish from the process of doing underpaid data labeling. But I'm not from Kenya, so I cannot really speak a lot about it, but I think you should watch it. There are a lot of documentaries about how it's really bad. But I'll tell the story about from Zambia because I know this is my where I come from. So we have the story. So imagine that a nice company comes to your local community and they say, "Oh, we're here to empower you and we're going to teach you digital skills and you're going to learn about how to use the computer. You're from a little village and you don't know." So this guy is a very looking is a Western person and they come with this big dream for you as a community. So then they start training people how to use the technology. And then suddenly, a few years later, they employ the same community members to start doing something called data labeling. And so we see this story, and I just give this story because it's close to home of a social enterprise that went of an organization, an NGO, that went from being a social enterprise to becoming an AI partner. And so they're providing AI training, agent reliability, data labeling, red teaming. So basically, all the things that the big tech companies are looking for. But we asked the question, how did they come into the country? They came in through a very friendly approach. We're going to help people. We're going to give them jobs. We're going to make life convenient for them. And they take the picture of very happy young people who are probably not paid high wages because of the exchange rate. And they viewed one of the leading African AI data labeling countries. So this is just one example, and it's happening in different places. It's happening in South Africa, it's happening in Kenya. And that was also the question of the pipeline and the supply chain is not just the minerals, it's also the people who are using the platforms, it's also the people who are labeling AI. And this is how AI is being trained on the continent, really, and what the implications are for these communities, because they go for communities that have low employment opportunities or that are from a more disadvantaged background and that are also a bit more eager to have a job, young people. But the impact is something that we are just starting to see in Kenya. For example, I'll give an example of the Meta Ray-Bans. So with the Meta Ray-Bans, the glasses with the little camera on it, Meta sent this data to a Kenyan data labeler, who actually saw that the Meta Ray-Bans actually never turned off. And so people will be wearing the Meta Ray-Bans and they'll be caught in very compromised situation, like going to the bathroom or showing their bank statements or their important critical information. So it's a question of the pipeline and where it comes from, but it's also a question of women's safety. So there was a very big case that happened this year, where a Russian man came to Africa. He went to Uganda, he went to Kenya, he went to South Africa. And what he was doing is he was approaching young women who look vulnerable, and then he will pressure them to go to a hotel room, and they will not know that he was actually recording it. So this Russian person left the African continent and traveled to back to Russia, and that's where he started posting these videos on online channels. And like he victimized hundreds of women doing that. But what was the response? There was no response from Ray-Bans or from Facebook, the Meta, and because that's a Meta Ray-Ban collaboration. And also, there was no justice for these women. So, yeah, uh, I don't have an answer, but in terms of how we use AI, we have to also see another thing that we haven't touched on is how these things are actually also being used in war and also being used to uh, find minerals. So another example I'll give is Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates used AI, at least they claim to have used AI, and they used geosurveillance to map copper in Zambia, and they found the largest deposit of copper in the last 100 years in Zambia. That was last year. And they've started mining for that copper, which they're going to use. So I feel my personal perspective is like ChatGPT is just a PR for people, and to attack our critical thinking, because the wider use of AI is ultimately very colonial and we actually won't know the implications until it comes to our doorstep. So while you can say, okay, we'll not use the I think the bigger funding is not even coming from people, it's coming from governments like the United States that is giving contracts, defense contracts to companies like OpenAI, and we don't know how they use it. And then they use a bit of that profit to come into Africa and to colonize. But I just give a context of Africa. I've talked a lot, but hopefully I've answered your question. We have a few more minutes. So yes, thank you for sharing the link of the story. It's very, very, very scary. And I think this is the only story that has gotten public attention because a lot of stories don't get public attention at all. Yeah, I hope I have managed to depress you a bit.
And that's the world we live in. That's the things we have to deal with also. And we cannot just make them go away just by not talking about it.
Mhm.
And at the same time, I would be interested in maybe hearing a bit more about what civil society in Zambia and your region is doing, because I know there are many people who are active, like fighting this and fighting for a more self-determined digital infrastructure and so on. Maybe you can share a bit about that.
Yeah. I think ultimately at the center of it, we have to think about the right to be forgotten and the right to be disconnected as well. Because what these AI companies or what these big tech companies are trying to push a world in which it's inevitable for us but to use their platforms. Even when looking for a platform for this meeting, I know Nadine, we had the conversation about using Zoom or where do we go. So we do need innovators. We need innovators who are creating alternatives, but we also have to continue fighting and saying AI is not inevitable. This is a future that a few rich and disturbed people are creating, and we have to take care of our people and of our communities, which is the most important thing, and not outsource our own power. So with my organization, like Digital Grassroots, we try to make sure that there's a pipeline for getting people who are in the margins into decision-making spaces and into internet governance. So a lot of localized power shifting, bottom-up approaches, bottom-up innovations that are feminist, that are also decolonial, and that also decenter big tech. Because ultimately, if we are jumping into the imagination of big tech, we're literally giving away our power. So we also have to stop and think like, why do I want to build an AI tool for my community? Why? But yeah, we don't have to give legitimacy to their visions. But yeah, thank you for that question.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? We are at the end of our time, and I know your time is short today, Esther.
Yeah, I have five
Um,
more minutes if
you
people want.
have, okay.
Five. Yeah.
So if there is maybe one more question, can answer it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I guess my final comments are just we have to be very intentional also about our imagination. So many times our imagination is about protest or counter narratives, but that is also giving a bit of power to the existing narratives. So we also have to think about what imagination do we have for the future. And it's not just a case of making AI for good or just saying we're just maybe not going to fight it because this imagination started in 1730. So it's like, oh, why am I living in the reality of some ancestor who did bad things to my people? But we are going to be the ones that create the future, and we can actually fight for it, just like people fought against colonialism with their blood, sweat, and tears. Maybe this time, at least, it's hopefully not that violent, but it's violent in many places. It's violent in In the Middle East, it's violent. In Central Africa, we're seeing what's happening in Iran. In Palestine, we're seeing what's happening in the DRC. And these AI companies are being used to murder people, and we're watching it. So it's not that this fight is not, they're not people who are being killed, they're people who are being killed in the process, whether it's the child laborer who is mining for that critical mineral, or whether it's the family that's driven out in the Congo conflict because the militia want to export the minerals so that we can have a nice shiny iPhone and communicate quickly. It's also like, are we changing? Going back to the short film we watched, are we changing as well? The more we interact with this artificial intelligence, are we also forgetting our values of what it meant to be human? Because now AI is telling us this is what it means to be human. Are we outsourcing our opinions to ChatGPT, which I know my friends do it, and I'm like, why? Even re for religious purposes, they're like, ask ChatGPT. So it's a question of how are we adapting, how are we changing, and in as much as the world is being changed slowly, it starts when we change ourselves. Very poetic, very flattering, but at the end of the day, the places we can start is with ourselves.